Going live. Welcome, everybody. We have participants joining us, coming at us fast. Abigail, Bailey, Charlotte, Evelyn, Madison, Sammy, Susanna. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We'll get started here officially at 10 minutes after the hour. But in the meantime, ooh, wow, you've got a whole lot of people joining very quickly. Nice. This is a good one. High expectations, I think. So while we're waiting, everybody, what makes you want to keep reading? When you're stuck in that book, why do you like to read in the first place? What makes you want to keep reading? Let's talk about that in the chat for a minute, and then in a couple minutes, I will introduce our amazing author who lives in southern Utah. What's the weather like down there?
Cold and snowy.
Cold and snowy. Oh, that's sad. I was hoping to hear nice and warm.
Oh, no, no, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right. It's actually been a little warmer up here than I would have thought. We had about 40 degrees the last couple days, which is not too bad. We're at 46 right now in northern Utah.
Wow.
Yeah. So what's cold to you? Is 46 cold? I guess it's all a matter of perspective, right?
Well, Cedar City is actually about 5,000 feet in elevation. So we're actually higher than Provo.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Most people think southern Utah, they think St. George, but we're
right.
considerably higher than they are. So we often have snow when like Utah Valley doesn't.
Cool. Let's look at some of these answers. It's fun to read because keep reading because of tension. Comfort characters make me happy. All the unanswered questions, the suspense and the drama. A fluttery excitement in my heart that I only get when I'm excited. Nice. What else? What are you seeing? What do you like?
I'm seeing some stuff about escape, living someone else's life.
Yeah. I think that's a big one for a lot of us. Get transported into a better world, or worse, dystopian, everything's falling apart. Characters are so important. You care about the characters. Somebody really likes clarinets. Nice. All right. Well, everybody, it's my pleasure this morning to introduce you to Rosalyn Eves. And did I say that correctly? Okay. Rosalyn Eves is an English professor and writer living in southern Utah. Her historical fantasy trilogy sounds very interesting. Blood, Rose, Rebellion. Do you have covers to show us?
Yeah, nice. Right here.
Blood, Rose.
This is the first one.
Nice. Okay. Lost Crow Conspiracy and Winter War Awakening are out with Knopf Random House. And her historical coming of age novel, Beyond the Mapped Stars, releases this summer in 2021. Exciting. So we can't wait to hear a little bit about those books, and we can't wait to hear your presentation. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I am going to start by sharing a screen. But like he mentioned, I am an English professor. And so often when I teach, especially when I teach with Zoom, I like using PowerPoints or something on a screen because it makes it easier for everybody to follow along with where we are without getting lost. So today we're going to be talking about writing emotion. And one of the reasons I wanted to start with that question of why do you like reading is because I think that for a lot of us, what draws us into books, what makes us connect to the characters, what makes us want to keep reading is because we like feeling something. Either we like to be, some of us like to be scared and then reassured. Some of us like to feel a sense of wonder. Some of us like to feel that swoony romance along with the characters. But I think ultimately a lot of us do read for the emotional experience. So that means that as a writer, you have to ask yourself, how do I create that emotion? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Some different techniques that you can use to add emotion to the books or the stories that you're writing. I want to show you 3 different examples, and we'll talk a little bit about the differences between them. So first, Bob felt sad. If I tell you that Bob felt sad, how many of you feel sad? Some of you might, if you're really a compassionate person, you might, but most of us, if we're told what someone feels, it doesn't necessarily make us feel anything. What about this? If instead of telling you Bob felt sad, what if I show you? Tears pooled in Bob's eyes and spilled down his cheeks, his throat burned. Do you feel anything different with this one? A little bit more, right? So showing someone is showing what someone is feeling is a more powerful way of conveying emotion than just telling us what someone feels. But what we're going to talk about today is some tactics that you can use to not just show people what the character is feeling, but also help them feel some of what the character is feeling. So Bob didn't watch as Lucy left, shutting the door firmly behind her. He stared out the window at the bare tree trunks, hoarfrost standing stiffly on naked twigs. He tried not to listen to the sound of her car starting, the engine revving before she drove off. She was gone. She had been his entire life for the past 6 years, and she had walked away as casually as if they'd been together for 6 seconds. Okay, do you feel anything different with this one? But notice this last one. Can you tell what Bob is feeling here? You can tell some of what he's feeling, but does this paragraph ever tell you what he's feeling? Does it ever come out and name an emotion? No, it doesn't. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to show you a bunch of different examples from published authors, mostly from middle grade and young adult fiction. And we're going to talk about the tactics that authors use to help you feel emotions with the characters rather than just showing or trying to tell. So, what's the key to writing emotion? Well, first of all, it's moving beyond showing versus telling. A lot of times you hear show, don't tell. What we're talking about today goes one step past that to describing objects, scenes, situations, and events in a way that allows the reader to feel the emotion with the character. That's really our goal, is we want readers to feel what the character is feeling without us having to say or name what the emotion is. This has a fancy name. This technique is also called the objective correlative, but you don't really need to know that unless you're trying to impress somebody. So we're going to talk today about 5 different ways that you can add emotion to your scenes, that you can help your readers feel the same emotion with the characters. The first one is in the way you describe objects and the way you treat objects in the story. The second comes through the use of metaphors. The third comes through the way we describe situations or scenes. We'll look at how you can use chain of events to convey emotion, and how you can use a character's movement or gesture to also convey emotion. So I want to start with objects. Now, we see this quite often in fiction where there's an object in the story that has some kind of meaning to the character. And because of what happens to that object, we get an insight into what the character is feeling, and we feel some of what the character feels with them. Shannon Hale is great at doing this. This example comes from her first book, Goose Girl, which is a retelling of the fairy tale Goose Girl, where a princess is being sent to get married in a faraway kingdom, and on the way to the kingdom, she is betrayed by her serving maid. Now, I want you to watch how Shannon describes this object, just a handkerchief, and how the description of the object helps us understand what the main character is feeling later in the story. So she writes, "It was made from a thin ivory cloth with green rust and yellow lace edging. The stitching was done by my grandmother," and this is her mother talking to her. "Her voice was soft, as though to convince Annie that the words were for her alone and not a performance for the crowd. She unfastened a horsehead brooch from her breast. My mother used to carry it, and then she gave it to me before she died. I have always felt it held a part of her. When I wear it, I feel her eyes on me, approving, guiding, protecting. So I send with you my own protection." The queen winced first, then stabbed her third finger with the brooch pen. She squeezed 3 drops of blood onto the handkerchief. Her hands were shaking. She put the stained handkerchief in Annie's hand and held it a moment, sincerity straining her brow. We are of one blood. I will protect you. All right, now I want to ask at this point, what do you think Annie feels about this handkerchief? What does this handkerchief represent to her? Yeah, it's about her family, her mother's love, her mother's protection. Now watch what happens just a few scenes later to this handkerchief and how Shannon Hale uses the description of this moment, what we know about this object and what it means to Annie, to help us feel what Annie's feeling in this moment. And I mentioned earlier that there's a betrayal. This comes just after the betrayal. She ends up falling in the river and she loses the handkerchief. Her cold fingers fumbled at the wet fabric at her breast where the handkerchief had been, where it should be. Annie felt for it, patted her dress, looked at the ground around her feet. It was gone. She realized that she must have lost it in the stream. It would be far away by now. Who would protect her? Okay, so what do you think Annie is feeling in this moment? Yeah, loss and fear. And you'll notice that she's not using the name of any of these emotions, but she's described the handkerchief in such a way that when Annie loses it, we feel that same sense of fear, that panic, that loss of protection. So that's the first way of doing it. Can any of you guys think of any stories or movies or well-known stories or movies where the author uses an object to convey what the character might be feeling? Yeah, Lord of the Rings is a big one. That one ring to rule them all. We feel the same burden when Frodo's carrying it, and we feel that same sense of relief when he's finally able to get rid of it. And there are lots of other books that do the same kind of thing. So that's one way to use this technique of adding emotion. You pick an object that's important to the character, you show the readers why that object is so important to the character, and then you have something happen to it that allows the reader to feel with the character what the character might feel. What the character might feel in that moment. All right, the next tactic that we're going to look at is using metaphor. Now, this is from a book by Chris Crow, who's an English professor, called Death Coming Up the Hill. And this is written as a coming-of-age novel about a young man right during the Vietnam War era. And one of the things that's interesting about this book is it's written entirely in haiku. Professor Crow wrote it so that there's one syllable, some 16,000 syllables in the book, one syllable for each of the young men that died in Vietnam in 1968. But I want you to, in this scene, he's got a young man whose parents are divorced or divorcing, and he cares for both of his parents, but they're both very, very different people. And so in this scene, I want you to look for the metaphor and look for, what does the metaphor tell us about how this kid is feeling? I looped one arm around Dad's neck and reached my other arm around Mom's. Feeling their love for me, I tugged to pull them closer, to knit us into a tight group hug, but Dad leaned right and Mom leaned left, and I spanned the distance between them like a bombed out bridge. Okay, first of all, we're going to put your English skills to use. What's the metaphor here? Yeah, I spanned the distance between, technically this is a simile, but metaphors and similes work the same way. I spanned the distance between them like a bombed out bridge. What is this kid feeling here? Yeah, he's feeling that stress of being torn between his family. That destroyed image of a bombed out bridge is a really powerful emotional jolt here in that scene. So one of the ways that you can convey to your readers what your characters are feeling is by choosing metaphors that fit the situation, that help the reader feel with the character. Now, the first time I was introduced to this tactic for writing emotion was by Martine Levitt. And so we're going to look at one of her books. Not surprisingly, this is something that she does in her own books. This is more of an extended metaphor. I don't know if any of you guys have read Keturah and Lord Death. It's a little bit older, but it's fantastic. In this, a young woman named Keturah meets Death while she's wandering around in the forest, but she persuades Death not to come for her right away, to give her 3 days to save her village from a plague. Now, Martine Levitt has said that she used her description of the forest as a sort of extended metaphor for what Keturah is feeling. So I'm going to read this, and I want you to think about How does this description of the forest tell you what Keturah is feeling? Here's a young woman who is contracted with death. She's agreed to die in 2 days. And so she's kind of confronting what that means. How thin the air felt at the forest's edge, how ghostly the trees that guarded their realm. The whole world seemed as delicate as a dandelion seed and as fleeting. How sad to know that the figment village of my imagination would not vanish when I ended, to understand that it was not I who had invented the moon the first time I realized how lovely it was, to admit that it was not my breath that made the winds blow. My heart knew that when I closed my eyes, I invented the night sky and the stars too. Wasn't the whole dome of the sky the same shape as the inside of my skull? Didn't I create the sun and the day when I raised my eyelids each morning? All right, what do you think she's feeling here? Okay, dread, poetry, or dread, confusion maybe, a little bit of uncertainty. But she's also realizing that she's not the center of the world. It's easy sometimes when you're living your life to feel like everything revolves around you. And she's confronting the fact that that's not true, that she's going to die and the world is going to continue being the world whether or not she's there to observe it. And I want to point out a couple of the words she's using. Look at the words she used to describe the forest, right? And she said that the forest represents the character's state of mind, the author did. Ghostly, dandelion seed, fleeting, figment. All of these words suggest something that's not permanent, right? And so it gives that sense of transiency to her experience. So this is another way that you can use metaphor. You can use, sometimes people use weather, but that gets a little bit overdone, but you can use the way you describe where your character is to help people understand what the character is feeling. I think the most common way we see writers using description to create a feeling of emotion in the work is the way they describe situations or scenes. This is from Evie Savoy's American Street, which was a National Book Award finalist a couple of years ago. And this is about a young woman who, her mother is bringing her to the US from Haiti, but her mom gets held up by immigration officials. And so she has to go to Detroit by herself to live with cousins that she's never actually met. And I love this particular scene because without telling us, the author is able to show us exactly what this young woman is feeling her first couple of days in Detroit. I step into my first snowfall. It started a few minutes ago while we were in the car. The roads here are so wide and straight and clean. We pass a small crowd standing near what looks like a bus stop, a tiny glass shelter with a single bench. Their hoods and thick coats make them look like the fat iguanas that cling to the bright, flamboyant trees back home. Nothing here is alive with color like in Haiti. The sun hides behind a concrete sky. I search the landscape for yellows, oranges, pinks, or turquoises like in my beloved Port-au-Prince, but God has painted this place gray and brown. Only a thin white sheet of snow covers the burned out houses and buildings. The flakes seem to appear from out of nowhere, like an invisible hand sprinkling salt onto zombies. Okay, what is this girl feeling? Yeah, a lot of you are saying homesick. How can you tell? She doesn't ever say she's homesick. So how do you know that's what she's feeling? The comparison, and look at the kinds of comparisons she's using. What kinds of words does she use to describe Haiti? Yeah, it's bright and it's alive. What about the US, specifically Detroit? What kind of words does she just use to describe it? Yeah, it's gray and it's dead. Look at that last line, right? That the snowflakes are like an invisible hand sprinkling salt on the zombies. And so this is kind of subtle, right? If you're not paying attention, you might miss that, but you would still feel the way she feels. You can still feel that contrast, that longing for something that's bright and alive in contrast to this new world that seems kind of dead. And of course, then through the course of the story, you're going to see the ways she describes Detroit change as she learns more about this new home and as it starts to become home for her. Okay, I want to use another example to show how you can describe a scene or a situation in a way that conveys emotion. I think a lot of you guys are familiar with The Book Thief. And so here's a moment where the main character is about to, well, not the main character because it's told from the point of view of death, but where Liesel is about to be separated from her mother. And I want you to pay attention to the emotion here and then look at why does it convey that emotion. Liesel remained in the corner of the small, dusty office as her mother sat with clenched thoughts on a very hard chair. There was the chaos of goodbye. It was a goodbye that was wet, with the girl's head buried into the woolly, worn shallows of her mother's coat. Okay, what is she feeling here? Okay, sadness, grief, how can you tell? She's crying, so that's a cue, yeah. Look at the contrasting words. Look at the kinds of sounds in that first paragraph. Dusty, clenched, hard. What kind of a feeling do those words convey? Yeah, they're hard, they're uncomfortable words. And then we contrast that. You'll notice that goodbye gets mentioned twice. There's kind of a weird syntax here, right? We don't usually say there was the chaos of goodbye. It was a goodbye that was wet. That's not the way most of you would say that line, but it works because it emphasizes the goodbye part. And you'll notice the contrast of those really hard early words with what kind of a sound is a W? Woolly, worn, shallows. Right? We get the contrast of those really hard, unfriendly words with the warmth and softness that she associates with her mother. So again, this isn't necessarily like the descriptive words that are being used, but the kind of words you're using can also help influence the emotion that people feel when they read it. Okay. The next example, I think, is one that most of you are familiar with. This is a chain of events. And a chain of events works if you set it up the right way. You have to set up a chain of events so that people understand why what is happening is so significant to the story. So those of you guys who have seen Hamilton, which I think at this point is probably most of you, what do words mean to Hamilton? Right? He writes himself about words. I wrote my way out of hell. I wrote my way to revolution. I was louder than the cracking of bell. I wrote Eliza love letters until she fell. I wrote about the Constitution and defended it well. And in the face of ignorance and resistance, I wrote financial systems into existence. And when my prayers to God were met with indifference, I picked up a pen. I wrote my own deliverance. Yeah, so words for Hamilton, they are freedom. What else? I mean, words are his weapons, but they are literally his salvation, right? He turns to words when even God fails him. Okay, so keep that in mind. One of the things that I think Lin-Manuel Miranda does so brilliantly here is he makes it so clear how important words are to Hamilton, how important his legacy is. And then most of you know this, right? But he's unfaithful to his wife. And when she finds out, what does she do? She burns his words. I'm erasing myself from the narrative. Let future historians wonder how Eliza reacted when you broke her heart. I'm burning the memories, burning the letters that might have redeemed you. I hope that you burn. Okay, what is she feeling here? Yeah, pain and betrayal. And because Lin-Manuel Miranda has set us up for this so well, because we know how important words are to Hamilton, how important his reputation is, we also understand the significance of burning letters. For a lot of people, that might not be a big deal, but for Hamilton, who's obsessed with words, that's everything. So that would be one example of how you can use a sequence of events or a chain of events to help readers feel something along with the character. But you'll notice that in each of these situations, your job as the writer is to set it up so that the reader gets that emotional payoff. So if an emotional scene isn't working very well, it might be a matter of looking back at, have you set this up enough so that readers can appreciate what's happening here? All right, and then the last one that I want to talk about before we do an example together is movements and gestures. And this comes from Gary Schmidt, who is also really, really good at this. This is the description of a woman who just got a telegraph telling her that her husband, who had been presumed lost at war, had been found. Now I want you to look at how he sets it up so that she just makes a sound, just a little sound, but because of the way it's set up, you know exactly what she's feeling. Think of the sound you make when you let go after holding your breath for a very, very long time. Think of the gladdest sounds you know, the sound of dawn on the first day of spring break, the sound of a bottle of Coke opening, the sound of a crowd cheering in your ears because you're coming down to the last part of a race in your head. Think of the sound of water over stones in a cold stream and the sound of wind through green trees on a late May afternoon in Central Park. Think of the sound of a bus coming into the station carrying someone you love. Then put those together, and they would be nothing compared to the sound that Mrs. Baker made that day from somewhere deep inside that had almost given up when she heard the first line of that telegram. Okay, here again, what is she feeling? Yeah, joy. How do you know? And it's partly because of the way he set that up. If he just said, she made a really happy sound, you wouldn't feel that the same way you feel it because he set it up. All of these things that we can relate to, I think most people can relate to at least one of those examples of what joy sounds like. So he doesn't have to do more than just say, put all of those together, and that was the sound that she made. So all of these, again, are tactics that you can use when you're writing to help your reader feel with your character. Right? So this goes past telling us what the character is feeling or even showing us what the character is feeling. It's helping the reader feel along with the character. And you can do this by introducing objects that have some significance to the character, and then something happens to the object in a way that helps us understand what the character is feeling. You can do this by using metaphors or similes. You can do this by the way you describe a scene or a situation. A series of events that lead to something that we understand, that we feel because of the way it's been set up. Or in this case, sometimes even the way a character acts, the sound they make, that can also tell us a lot about what the character is feeling. And for those of you that are worried, no, the telegraph is not telling her that she's dead. It's good news. Okay. I think what we've been talking about here is is summed up by this quote by Richard Price. The bigger the issue, the smaller you write. Remember that. You don't write about the horrors of war. No, you write about a kid's burnt socks lying on the road. You pick the smallest manageable part of the big thing and you work off the resonance. Okay, so I want to take just a couple of minutes and try an exercise, and we'll have a couple of you share if we have time for that. I want you to pick one of the images here and describe it. Well, actually, first I want you to pick an emotion, then pick one of the images and try and describe it in a way that conveys that emotion without you ever naming what it is. Okay, so just pick one of the pictures, try and describe it in a way that conveys an emotion without ever naming the feeling. So I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that, and then I'll have a few of you share that. Yeah, when you're done, if you're willing to share it, you can put the finished passage in the chat or in the Q&A, and we can look at some of those. Probably it's better if you put it in the Q&A if you want to share it, because the chat goes so fast, they'll probably get lost. Okay, I'll give you about 1 more minute to work on this, and then we'll talk about the ones that have been submitted. Okay, I'm not sure how many of these we will get through, but we'll try and get through some of them. What I'm going to do is just read the ones from the Q&A, and then I'd like you to try and tell me in the chat what you think the emotion is they're going for here. Okay, so here's the one that shows up first. The tree is far from the others. She looks at it and feels the smile trying to pull at her lips. She grew up on that tree. They grew up on that tree. She moved forward, more sure and smooth in every step than her child self had been, and stepped onto the raised trunk like an ascendant queen. 2 steps onto the length of it, and then she sat down. The forest hadn't changed. What did it say about her kind, that they could grow up in places like this and age the same, but the moment they left, they became new? She pushed the thought aside when the trunk wobbled and turned back to its edge where he was climbing up behind her. Feels like we went back in time, right? He asked quietly. I wish we had. Yeah, there's a lot of great nostalgia here. And you can tell that by the way that they're describing it, kind of the positive words, the good memories that are associated from it, you can tell there's a lot bound up in this moment, in this place. Okay, the next one, relaxed, such an open space and smooth, it glides nicely through where it stands. What's the emotion that you get from that? Placid, relaxing. Yeah, I think all of those are in there. Crystal-like wings, tiny arms and legs. It fluttered about my head, almost dancing on the air. Yeah, beauty, wonder, I think those are all great words. And just the words that they're using, these kind of delicate, fragile words, help emphasize that. Everything was broken. The whole landscape was just a bleak orange color. The roof was gone. Any evidence that life had been inside was gone. It was just an empty shell out in the middle of nowhere. Nothing was inside. Nothing ever looked like it lived inside. There was nothing but a few old bricks left behind from a past that could have been filled with stories, beginnings, and endings. Now just a piece of rubble forgotten in the desert. Yeah, I think a loss of regret, like the repetition of nothing definitely helps emphasize that sense of loss. And I like the contrast at the end between what could have been and what is now. Okay, here's another one. Always moving forward, ticking, talking, sometimes a blur without meaning. Sometimes a lifetime is lived in 1 minute. Time always moves forward. Yeah, there's kind of a relentless forward movement in the sentence that I think conveys, could be anxiety, could be that sort of relentless pace of time. Yeah, I think all of those work. The crumbling building may once have had a tall, indestructible towers, but they have since fallen and become nothing more than dust. As the sun began to sink and cast shadows across the cracked, worn brick, I leaned against its shaken frame and tried to mend my own broken walls. Yeah, a lot of people are saying there's a lot of pain here. I think like the earlier one that described the ruins, there's a sense of something lost, but I like how they shifted it at the end to make it a metaphor for something personal. The clock ticked lightly in my ear. Oh, how the seconds I spent just listening to the clock. Quite ironic, isn't it? that my words, excuse me, that my words are mere time fillers for my thoughts, and yet here I am, victim to my own realization. But I digress, because I need to listen to the clock, if not for counting seconds, then to count my own. Okay, I think it's interesting. I'm getting contemplation and tension. So there's a couple of different ways that you can read it. I think this is one of the wonderful and terrible things about writing, is that two people can read the same passage and take something totally away from it. But I think on the whole, we're getting a sense of tension, that there's something not quite right here. The tailor had darkness in his eyes as he looked at the broken shoes. They were small, far too small for Mary herself. The color, a grimy off cream that spoke of a once pristine white, looked out of place among the clean workshop. The holes and rips that told stories of playtimes long gone made the holes in her own jacket seem that much bigger. They were poor shoes for a poor family, that much was clear. Okay, getting a sense of sadness, a little bit of loss, some of the helplessness that maybe comes from not having enough resources. Okay. All right, I think we'll do a couple more and then we'll take questions. Can you guys all see the Q&A? Because there are some great ones here if you want to take a look as well. The warped trunk of the tree twisted into the ground like a screw. Its drooping branches held only faded leaves. The tree stood apart from the others, waiting for someone to befriend it. Yeah, a lot of loneliness. Okay. There were ashes everywhere. There was no sign of life, no sign of anything, but then I saw it, two little white shoes among the ashes. Before that moment, the destroyed town was just a sad sight, but now it was something more than that, something sinister. Okay, I'm gonna go through and try and mark some of these answers so that you guys can see these, because I don't think we'll have a chance to go through all of them. But I hope that you can see that if you're paying attention to the way you're describing something, you can convey a lot of emotion about the scene just in the way you write about the scene, even if it's something inanimate. Do you guys have questions? Sorry, I'm trying to go through the Q&A and
Since we have so many passages in the Q&A, let's try to do the questions now in the chat.
sorry, we've made everything confusing.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Everybody, do your questions in the chat. Don't do any more passages in the chat so that she can pick out some actual Q&A, some actual questions at this point, okay? We love your passages. They're awesome. And I will keep marking them.
Okay, that would be great.
Answered as live, or a live answer so that they can see all of each other's passages.
Okay, that would be great. I saw a really great question earlier about emotion in action scenes. Action scenes, weirdly enough, the approach for action scenes and romantic scenes are often quite similar. If all you have in an action scene is action, you're going to lose the reader. The action should also have some kind of emotional beat. And when you want it to be really fast pitched, you don't necessarily need a lot of emotion in there, but you can build up the action so that they show something, right? If we're having a scene with betrayal, if you've built up the relationship between the two so that when they get down to the fight and someone goes in for the kill, we feel that sense of betrayal. You can also do it by slowing down certain moments in the action scene where we see interaction between the characters. We see somebody noticing an irrelevant detail that tells us what they might be feeling in that moment. I think there are lots of ways that you can layer emotion into action that are kind of the same way as these descriptions. You just would use it on a smaller scale because descriptions tend to slow things down, which is great for emotional moments. We often need to slow the story down for people to really feel that emotional moment. So you can use the same kind of tactics just on a little bit smaller scale. Somebody asked, is there too much emotion? It really depends on the kind of book and the kind of reader. Some readers like books that are more action-packed and that don't go into as much emotion. Other people really like character-driven stories that are really all about the emotional journey of the character. So it kind of depends on what you're writing. If you're worried that there's too much emotion or not enough emotion, I think it's really important to have readers because readers can tell you, I got a little overwhelmed here, or something that my readers, my critique group will often tell me, especially on first drafts where I'm more focused on getting plot than character. Sometimes they'll say things like, this was a really big moment here. Your character didn't really react to it. We probably need more emotion here. So readers can be really great for pointing out where you have emotion or where you could use more of it. Okay. Is there a way to show guilt? I think it would be kind of like what we've done here, in that you would think about what are some words that convey guilt. It might be like an obsessive attention to detail. It might be like carefully not thinking about something, or it might be, obsessing about it. It kind of depends on how your character feels guilt. But you could, by focusing on the details that they notice, you could help convey some of that guilt. You could also do it in the way you set up the interactions between this character and whatever it is that they feel guilty about, so that we understand what the cost was, so that we also feel guilty with the character. A good type of emotion in a murder mystery book. It depends on what kind of murder mystery it is. I have read cozy murder mysteries that are funny as much as anything else. If you saw the movie Knives Out, right, it has a lot of humor in it. Sometimes murder mysteries are very dramatic. Sometimes they can be full of a lot of family secrets and betrayal and hurt. So it depends. I think the first thing I would do is figure out what the subgenre is, so that you can figure out what the emotion is. But murder mysteries are a good place to include emotion, because mysteries are all about motive and unpacking who has what motive. And so as you're figuring out character motives, you're going to run into a lot of emotion. How can you write powerful emotions that you have never experienced? That's a really great question, especially for you guys where you may not have a lot of experience with all the things you hope to experience. I think one thing you can do is read widely, read about people who have experienced it, see how they describe it in authentic ways. But you can also work from neighboring emotions. You may never have experienced the guilt of killing someone, at least I hope you haven't, but you've probably felt crushing guilt over something else you did that's hurt someone. So you can also find neighboring emotions and extrapolate from that. Sorry, I just clicked on something. It took me all the way back to the back of the chat.
There are some questions in the Q&A also.
Are there?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to read some of those out, that would be great.
I like this one. Do you have any advice for conveying emotion through dialogue and dialogue tags?
Yeah, if you're working through emotion through dialogue, obviously you can have people say what they're feeling right out. That may not help the reader feel with the character, but sometimes you can do a lot with subtext, which is what the character thinks but isn't feeling. So if you have two people fighting and one person keeps saying, I'm fine, why are we still talking about this? You know that they're not fine, and you can feel some of that prickliness and that irritation from what they're saying. But dialogue tags are a great way to bring that in, because you can show the difference between what they say they're feeling and what they're actually feeling by their body language. And that can help bring some of the emotion in the scene too.
How about this one? How do you feel for you personally? Is it easier to write painful emotions or joyful emotions?
I've actually had this conversation with some writer friends recently. I think pain is much easier to write than joy, because I don't know, pain, maybe it's partly because they're both universal feelings, but joy is hard to write in a way that feels real without feeling cheesy. So I think joy is a lot harder to write.
That kind of goes along with another question. Are there any emotions that you think are cliche that should be not used as much, or that we should avoid using?
I don't think any emotions are cliche. I think the way we describe emotions is sometimes cliche. Um, you often see in movies, right, where the character is depressed and it's raining outside, right? That's kind of a cliche way of showing emotions. But I think emotions are normal and human, and especially if you're writing a younger protagonist where this is the first time they're feeling this, a first heartbreak, that's always going to be important. I think what matters is convincing your readers that this emotion is important to the character, and describing it in a way that feels true to that character rather than relying on a cliched way to explain the emotion.
Cool. Do you find it easier to convey emotion through any specific point of view? Do you have any favorite POVs? Or do you think there are any POVs that are worse than others for creating emotion?
I don't think so. I mean, I think second person is really hard to do well, because a lot of people are like my sister, where if you told her to do something, she would do the opposite. So if you're writing second person and you're trying to tell the reader that they're feeling a certain way, they might resist that. Otherwise, I don't think so. I think there are some advantages. I think if you're in deep third person or first person point of view, you can get more deeply into the character's head that helps them. But sometimes it's helpful to have a more omniscient narrator, because the narrator can do more with description than your character might, right? Not all characters are going to be attentive enough to the scene to notice the kind of details that you guys were using to describe emotion when you were describing these pictures.
Good points. Good points. Um, Ooh, how do you know your readers are feeling the emotions that you intended?
This is why you have people read your stuff. Sometimes you don't, because something that's really emotionally meaningful to you may not come across the same way to other people. I teach a lot of writing students, and often you know your story so well, you know the situation so well. Sometimes writers forget to give clues to readers that are important to understanding what's going on. So I always think you need to have readers, and just say, especially with the really important, meaningful scenes, you need to have readers that can say, yes, this is what I feel when I read this, or say, I can see where you're going here, but I don't feel it yet. So you want readers that are going to be honest with you. I want to go back to the question that someone had asked earlier about, can you have too much emotion? I don't know that you can necessarily have too much emotion. I think some of that depends on genre, but I think you can overuse emotional beats. If you have these kind of really emotional descriptions in every paragraph in your story, it's going to bog the story down. Sometimes they talk about this like with tears. If you have a character that cries a lot, the more often they cry, the more it dilutes the power of crying. And so you want to be selective in where you put the emotion in. You want to decide, where do I really need people to feel with the character, and then focus your attention on developing the emotion in those scenes. Does that make sense? Like if you have the same really heightened emotion everywhere in the story, it gets a little exhausting. They need a break sometimes. So we need to have really high intense emotional scenes and less intense emotional scenes.
That's great. Great advice. Good stuff. Well, it looks like we're getting close to the end here. Rosalyn, is there some authors have Twitters or different accounts or
Yeah.
different Instagrams where they like to have people follow them? Do you want to share anything like that?
My website is just rosalyneves.com, and I'm on Twitter at Rosalyn Eves and Instagram at with Rosalyn Eves with a period, but usually some variation on my name. You should be able to find it.
Cool.
Anyway, thank you guys for being willing to share. I'm sorry we didn't have time to go through more of them. These were really great. I always love doing this kind of exercise because people come up with such amazing passages. So thanks for letting me come. It's been fun.
It's really fun to see those passages and to see them internalizing and using the skills that you've taught already. So thank you so much, Rosalyn. It's a pleasure to have you here. And thank you for all your amazing advice. I'm sitting here taking notes and learning, and I can't wait to start using this stuff as well. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks again for having me.
All right, take care.
Tell your mom hi, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.